Just hours earlier, the much-awaited touchdown happened. Aboard his Air Force One, the US President Joe Biden landed in New Delhi. And straight he headed to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's residence. Both the leaders held discussions for about an hour, and according to the joint statement, President Joe Biden lauded India's G20 presidency. The two leaders held discussions on a range of issues, including the importance of Quad initiative in the Indo-Pacific region. President Joe Biden reaffirmed his support for a reformed UN Security Council and India's bid for permanent membership. The two leaders underscored the need to reform the multilateral institutions. They also reaffirmed the role of technology in defining their strategic partnership. The leaders re-emphasized that the shared values of freedom, democracy, human rights, inclusion, pluralism and equal opportunities for all citizens are critical. The leaders reiterated their support for building resilient global semiconductor supply chains. The leaders lauded the settlement of the last outstanding World Trade Organization dispute between the two countries. Now, this is Biden's first presidential visit to India, and climate change has been a common topic of concern. There are bilateral interests like economic cooperation and multilateral investment opportunities that were also discussed during the meeting. Now, over the years, New Delhi and Washington have found an isolated space of diplomacy, where even with changing geopolitics, bilateral engagements have continued to foster. And this meeting in New Delhi was an extension of that idea. Now, to decode this meeting further, we are being joined by Jessica Stone from New Delhi. Jessica, welcome to the broadcast. I want to start with the joint statement that says global governance must be more inclusive and representative. We have heard these words time and again in the last few weeks, be that India's permanent seat at the UNSC that Biden is talking about, or the African Union seat at the G20. How will this impact the world of tomorrow?
Oh, I think those are very big questions that have yet to be answered when we get the final communique, Ananya. But listen, I just got off the call. Welcome to my mobile newsroom here. I just got off a call with two White House officials with more information on the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. And it happened for about an hour, as you know, shortly after President Biden arrived here in New Delhi. This is how it was characterized by the two White House officials. They called the relationship undeniably warm. And they gave us a little bit more information on all of that reporting we've been seeing in the last, let's say, 10 hours about some sort of rail link between India, the Middle East, and Europe. This White House official is calling this an earth-shaking corridor. So really teeing up what might be a very large announcement on Saturday concerning some type of agreement between India, the United States, and the Middle East to create a trade route, essentially. And of course, this harkens back to the kind of announcement that Beijing made about 10 years ago, where there was not only the Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, right? There was also the Maritime Silk Road. And this is very similar through the same part of the world, and really potentially a competitive type of agreement where the U.S. would get much more involved in financing this type of deal. We don't have any more specifics than that, but certainly White House officials teeing up what they call a corridor that could be, quote, a major breakthrough that could link the Middle East to India and Europe, saying that President Biden will announce more on Saturday. There was a lot of characterization of this relationship as getting much warmer over the last few months. In fact, one White House official who says he's been working on India and U.S. relations for 35 years said most of the time this relationship was characterized by distrust. In the past couple of years, he said, it has completely turned around, and you can sense it in both of these leaders' communications. They went on to say that both of these countries have welcomed the congressional passage, as you mentioned, I believe, of that GE deal to make engines, GE engines here in India. It has passed Congress, as you know, in just the last week, and now it is moving forward. They are committing to advance it, these two leaders, that coming in the joint statement. They also announced a second master shipbuilding agreement that will allow India to help maintain U.S. ships, which is very key to the U.S. desires to be more active in the Indo-Pacific region. They don't necessarily have the reach to do that in South Asia in particular. Welcoming also the procurement of drones. So I think in terms of what you wanted to know on the communique, we had heard this reporting, and actually Jake Sullivan told reporters this on the way here, that climate change was also a problem in terms of coming to a firm resolution and agreement with respect to the joint communique, not only the issue of the war in Ukraine, but also climate change. We're told by White House officials that they have made progress in resolving the climate disputes on that communique, and that also, to your broader point, will be announcing some critically important reforms to multilateral development banks. But certainly, to your point of skepticism, the devil, as they say, will be in the details.
Absolutely. Jessica, stay with me, and thank you for all those updates, of course. We're also being joined by a special guest. Raymond E. Vickery is joining us live on this broadcast. He's the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Trade Development. And also on the broadcast is our correspondent from New York, Susan Tehrani. Mr. Vickery, let me quickly start with you. How do you see a bilateral meeting like this shaping the future of India-U.S. ties, especially because my correspondent here, Jessica, rightly pointed out from the communique and her sources, of course, that there was, decades ago, there was a sense of distrust between the two countries. But we have seen a complete turnaround of diplomacy between the two countries. So how are you assessing this specific meeting, taking that from here?
Yes, well, thanks very much for having me. I think that this shows that the U.S.-India relationship is on track. You know, prior to the 1990s, when I was in government, there was a feeling that the United States and India were estranged democracies. That has changed, but it's been a gradual process over a matter of decades. I do think that this joint statement shows that what was put in motion by the Biden administration, and that is an all-in bet on the confluence of interest between the United States and India, is progressing. It's not only a question of the values which are stated up front in the joint statement, but all of the detail in terms of the Quad, in terms of support on G20, in terms of ship servicing agreements, and across the board. I do think that the big announcements, of course, are going to be saved for the G20 communique. I expect that will involve mechanisms to increase funding for climate change, for infrastructure development. As you know, the president, Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor, have all emphasized the use of multilateral financing mechanisms to be able to promote those kinds of results. And this is in response, it seems to me, to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which was done in an uneconomic manner in order to aggrandize Chinese powers. So I think it's on track, and I think that this is all very encouraging.
All right, on track, as you say. Susan, quickly come in here. I can see about 29 points in this joint statement that has been released. Not even one has mentioned China. But the issues around Indo-Pacific, I can see, have been a recurring theme in this joint statement. How does this meeting help counter China's expansionist ambitions in the Indo-Pacific?
You know, what's interesting is we don't see China by name, but the word that we see constantly is the word inclusion. And that's very important considering the fact that, you know, China does not believe in an inclusive Indo-Pacific on the one hand, and then the nature of the Chinese regime on the other. More than a dozen times is stated in this statement that we see, the joint statement from India and the United States. And make no mistake, when the two sides talk about trade regarding semiconductor technology and also a safe telecommunication system between the two sides, China doesn't necessarily have to be named, but these are very important aspects, not only for India-US relations, but for countries in the region that are wary of China's activities, not only in the South China Sea, in the Indo-Pacific, and globally as well. So China is at the back burner. It's the elephant in the room, so to say. But also, I think we'll hear a lot more regarding China when all G20 members meet.
All right. Jessica, I just want to quickly come to you. Tomorrow, of course, the much-awaited G20 Summit is going to begin. It's a two-day summit. What is U.S. President Joe Biden expecting from this summit?
Well, I do think we're going to see some type of announcement with respect to multilateral development banks. I can tell you, having covered 2 or 3 presidents now, we haven't seen this type of open support for the Indian agenda, that is to say, to really give the G20 a new purpose, to represent and to better represent the global South. The G20 in many ways is struggling to find some level of relevance. Prime Minister Modi is taking it in a new direction, and the White House is going to make an announcement tomorrow about the level of support that the U.S. has for that. We know that the World Bank president is going to take photographs tomorrow with the U.S. president and the G20 members. And, of course, we'll also see that typical famous class photo, we call them, where we see all of the leaders as well. And so we should see some more announcements along the lines of climate change, of course. And, you know, we'll see how late we get that joint communique, because by all accounts, it's still coming down to the wire to find a type of language that everybody can agree on with respect to Ukraine in particular, as you know.
Absolutely, and as the G20 Sherpa puts it, consensus seems to be a challenge even at the moment. That was VOA correspondent Jessica Stone speaking with us. Also on the broadcast was Raymond A. Vickery and, of course, our correspondent from New York, Susan Teherani. Thank you for getting us all those insights, the three of you. And, of course, we'll be tracking the developments here on. And the G20 Summit is slated for tomorrow, a two-day summit. Thank you for all those insights.